And then we have a missed call from Alex that ends.
That's the
at
call
9.
we just saw, right, ending.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion on why the screen light would go off pretty much right when a call comes in?
The only thing that I could figure is when the phone came in, or excuse me, the call came in, that the person hit the side button to turn it off and then put it down or flip the phone over.
Do you know of anything on the phone that would cause the screen to go off right when a call comes in and stay off during the call that does not involve human interaction with the phone?
No, I don't.
I'll go to the next slide.
9:05 and 44 seconds, the backlight comes back on. And at 9:06 and 12 seconds, an orientation change to portrait begins.
Okay. And the next one, and we'll stop on that.
At 9:06 and 14 seconds, there's an incoming call from Alex that starts at that time.
And then the next one.
And then the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 18 seconds.
And the next slide.
And then we have an orientation change to portrait ends at 9:06 and 20
And
seconds.
stopping here, that call we just saw coming in from Alex, that was sandwiched within this orientation change.
That's correct, yes. It was in between them.
And next slide.
9:06:52, we have another incoming call from Alex that starts.
And the next one.
And then it ends, the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 59 seconds.
Now the last slide.
At 9:07, the backlight goes off and it remains off until 9:31 and 44 seconds.
Okay. And do you know from your review of the GM GPS data where the Alex Murdaugh Suburban was at 9:07?
Yes, at 9:07, he was like traveling from the house, or from his home to the house in, I forget the name of the city.
Like right, precisely at 9:07, where was he at that moment?
The 9:07 would be the driveway, I believe.
Right, the driveway.
Yes.
And Maggie's phone, the screen did not come on again until 9:31?
That's correct.
And just one more time, how much motion does it take to turn the screen?
Very little. I mean, just the slightest lift of the phone turns the screen on.
The court's indulgent. Please answer any questions from the state. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you.
And before that,
Don't forget your phone.
Conrad. Police court. Mr. Sturgis, how you doing today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Conrad. I'm well, thank you.
I believe at the beginning of your testimony you testified that you felt it likely there was some location data stored on Maggie's phone from June 7th that potentially was overwritten. Did I understand that correctly?
I said that there was data that was on the phone from June 8th, and that, correction, June 9th, and that data likely could have been on there had it been preserved properly.
And explain to the jury just real quick, how does an iPhone store that GPS information? In generic terms, and then if I need to get more specific, I will.
Sure. So the iPhone keeps that data, and it uses the GPS location, the GPS satellite, triangulates with the GPS satellites, and it stores that data.
Right. And does it store it in a sort of cache?
It does.
All right.
It is a cache.
And when it comes to iOS, as opposed to, say, a standard hard drive, iOS keeps certain databases caches fairly limited, correct? And
That's
it doesn't
correct.
allow them to access the entire memory available on a device at any given point, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And do you know, or at least in your training or your investigation, have you been able to determine just how big a typical cache is, at least would have been for Maggie's phone during this time?
No, I didn't research that. No.
Okay.
No, I didn't research that, no.
Okay, so you don't know how long Maggie's phone would have potentially stored GPS information at this during 2021, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
No.
All right. And just so I understand correctly, you agree that a iPhone will not record an orientation change if the screen is off, correct?
That's correct,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So I believe Mr. Barber handed you his phone to kind of demonstrate this lift to weight thing, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know what model iPhone Mr. Barber has? Did you look at it?
Don't know exactly which iPhone he has.
Okay. And do you know what version of iOS is on Mr. Barber's phone?
I do not know.
And Apple updates its iOS fairly frequently, correct?
They do, yes.
Do you know, at least, we don't know what's on Mr. Barber's phone, but do you know what the current release version is today?
It's 16 point something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know in your review of Maggie's phone what version was on Maggie's phone on June 7th of 2021?
I believe that was 14 point something.
I'm sorry.
I think it was 14.6, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. It was somewhere in the 14 range.
And are you aware that in some of these iOS updates, some of these sensitivities and some of these settings can change, correct?
Depending on bug fixes and things, yes.
And are you aware of a change that occurred in iOS 15 that changed how iPhones record orientation changes, or when they record orientation changes?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Okay. Can we go back to I forget, let's see, the PowerPoint? What exhibit was that? I believe it was it 155? Was there two? I just was aware of one. You 158? For this witness. This one. And this doesn't have a slide number, so bear with me. But first of all, before we talk about Maggie real quick, you did review Paul's phone to a certain degree, correct?
To a certain extent, yes.
All right. And do you recall from your review of Paul's phone when the last time his phone was unlocked on June 7th of 2021?
I don't recall, no. I'm sorry.
And we can find the state's exhibit if we need to, but would you disagree if I told you it was 8:49 p.m. or shortly
If
thereafter?
that's
8:49 p.m.?
if that's what's in the state's exhibit, I don't disagree with that.
Okay. And I believe one of your first slides here is that Maggie's phone locked. Let's see, go to 1, 2, 3 slides. One more. All right, back one. I'm sorry. 8:49:31, and your review of Maggie's phone found that her phone was locked at 8:49:31. Correct.
That's correct. Yes.
And it was not unlocked until when? The next day.
The next day. That's correct.
All right, and that's when it was recovered by law
By
enforcement.
law enforcement, yes, sir.
Okay. And did you review Alex's? You said you reviewed Alex's phone to a certain degree too. I think you said the steps, right?
The steps, yes.
And in your review, did you find any steps on his phone between 8:09 and 9:02 p.m.?
Let me go back and take a look at that. (8:09) and 9:02 p.m.
Correct.
Correct. No, I don't recall seeing that. I'm seeing the stuff from the knowledge seat here.
Okay. All right. But Maggie's phone's locked at 8:49:31, and it does not unlock till the next day, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Paul's locked for the last time around the same time, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And Paul's phone, in your review, to recall what time the battery died on his phone.
I don't recall, no, sir.
Would you dispute me if I said, and we can find the exhibit if we need to, his phone shut down at about 10:34 p.m.?
If that's what's in the report, I don't dispute it, no, sir.
All right. And would you agree with me if I said that Paul's phone locking at 8:49 and remaining on until 10:34, first of all, that's about, what, hour and a half or so?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know his battery state when his phone locked at 8:49 p.m.?
It was in low power mode.
So it was less than 10%, 2%, something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And would you agree with me when the fact that his phone remained on until 10:34 be indicative that it wasn't really handled much at all or used at all?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find any other evidence of any usage on Paul's phone after 8:49 that you can recall?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And when I say use, just so it's clear between us, I mean either answering a call, making a call, reading a text, sending a text, orientation change.
No user interaction with it.
All right. And so let's talk a little bit about the orientation change for a minute. So would you agree that the most likely reason for an orientation change is human interaction, meaning humans using the phone?
Yes.
All right. Are there any other possible explanations when you see an orientation change, or any other explanations that you, in your opinion, that could explain an orientation change?
Only if a phone, was in one position, lit up, fell off, and landed in another position.
Okay.
But no.
And when you see a series of orientation changes, 30 seconds or a minute between each orientation change, it'd be difficult to explain that by a phone just kept falling on its own, correct?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
If you see a series of 3 orientation changes, just speaking hypothetically for a moment, if you see a series of 3 orientation changes, say 30 seconds separate them or thereabouts, or a minute separate them, could you explain that? Would it be very likely that a series of falls caused those orientation changes?
It depends on how many falls it was making, but being jostled around in a pocket and the light on, being turned, if it's in a person's hand and being turned back and forth, then that would be the only thing I could indicate with an orientation change.
Okay. All right. Can we pull that slideshow back up, please? Let's go forward 1, 2. Okay, 8:53:15. There you go. And this is when Maggie's phone starts showing some steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you would agree that the most likely explanation for this is the phone is moving in some manner, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And those accelerometers are recording, or the bounces are jostling, that would most likely be explained by steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, you can't tell us who's carrying that phone at this time, can you?
No.
All right, next slide. All right, and so at this 8:53:20, you say there's some Siri usage and a squeezing of the side button. And let's just, is that the only explanation of why you would see the Siri pop up on a phone, is squeezing the side button, or are there other possibilities?
There's another possibility of her saying, hey Siri, and then that happens because it's a Siri user interface.
Okay, so there could be another explanation, but it's most likely someone squeezing the side button saying,
could be
hey
the side
Siri.
button saying, hey Siri, but it's a user interface with it.
Okay. All right. Go to next slide, please. Actually, let's go to 8:54:34, please. Should be one more. One more. There we go. All right, and here you say the camera gets activated, correct?
That's correct.
And you think the most likely explanation is somebody swipe the camera symbol on a locked phone, correct?
Right, either swipe the camera or touch the bottom button because it's coming from the springboard lock screen.
Okay, we say bottom button. Which button?
If you're looking at an iPhone and well, my most recent iOS, I think it's 16 point something, in the bottom right corner, there's a button that you can touch and hold and the camera comes on. But when that happens, it comes over from the left and the camera scrolls over.
Okay. And then next slide. And then 8:54:35. This is 1 second later. The camera use ends. Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so, in your opinion, based off the fact that that was used for a total 1 second, do you think that was someone intending to actually use the camera and take a picture?
I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's just a.
But the camera's
1
only
second.
open for a second, correct?
Right. They couldn't have taken a picture in a second.
All right. All right. 8:55:32. Okay. And we see the orientation change here at 8:55:32. Next slide. And the backlight goes off at 8:55:36, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
We go to the next slide. And the backlight's back on 9:03:52. So that's roughly, how long is that? 8 minutes? I don't know if I'm going to make you do math, but.
Yeah, about that. Yes.
And so the screen's off for that 8 minutes, correct?
That's correct.
And so, would you agree with me? It does seem likely someone's handling that phone Maggie's phone between 8:53 and 8:55, correct?
Yes.
All right. We see orientation changes. We see the potential button being pushed. Someone's got that phone in their hand, correct?
That's correct.
You can't tell us who, correct?
No, I can't.
All right. And then at 8:55:32, we see kind of an 8-minute gap in activity, correct? Between
Yes.
8:55 and 9:03, correct?
Yes.
Almost as if somebody put that phone down.
Yes, that's a possibility.
Whoever had it, correct?
Correct.
And you can't tell us where they put that phone down, right?
No, sir, I can't.
Could they put it in a vehicle,
That's very possible. I don't know.
a golf cart?
I don't know.
Okay, let's go to 9:04:23. Yep. All right. And we see this incoming call from Alex. You
Yes.
said the screen turns off almost immediately, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
In your opinion, you think somebody actually hit the button to turn
Somebody
the screen
shut
off,
the screen
correct?
off, yes.
Okay. But the screen comes back on at 9:05:44, if we can go to that side, correct?
Yes.
And then 9:06:12, we see an orientation change, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And 2 seconds later, we see what? Next slide, please. What is this? What is
That's
this
an
indicate?
incoming call from Alex.
Okay. 2 seconds after the orientation change starts, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then go to 9:07. Okay. And the screen goes off at 9:07, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And stays off for, what, roughly 23 minutes?
Yes.
And you just testified with Mr. Barber that Alex's car was sitting just outside his house, correct?
That's according to the documents that I reviewed. Yes.
And I don't know if you have this information in front of you, but did you determine when that GPS data shows his vehicle start to move?
Yes, it.
After 9:07.
Oh, after 9:07.
Well,
the,
first of all, is his vehicle stationary at 9:07?
no, it's in the driveway at 9:07, but it's at it starts at the house at 9:06 and 52 seconds p.m.
When do you start to see motion? Or do you
9:06 and 52 seconds is where I start to see the motion there.
Okay. And 8 seconds later is when Maggie's screen turns off
Yes.
for 23 minutes?
Yes.
And you agree that a iPhone, at least with version 14.6, when the screen's off, it will not record an orientation change, correct?
That's correct.
And you agree with me that you don't know what version iOS that Mr. Barber had on his phone that you just did that demonstration?
That's correct.
Did you conduct any tests with the phone with 14.6 to see what movement can cause it to, or what can cause that phone to screen to come on?
I don't have any 14.6 phones.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad.
Okay, Mr. Sturgis, you were asked about iOS version 15 and a change in orientation behavior. Is the raise to wake feature something distinct from orientation behavior?
No, the raised awake is a separate from orientation behavior. Raised awake's a separate application within.
Is raised awake the feature that causes the phone to come on with slight movement?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that the raised awake feature that you've already testified was active on Maggie Murdaugh's phone works any different than any iPhone today?
I have no evidence to prove that, no.
And again, you can refer to your notes. When Alex Murdaugh's SUV passed the location where Maggie Murdaugh's phone was recovered, the side of the road, was the screen off?
The screen was off, yes.
It was off as he approached it?
Yes.
And again, how much movement does it take to turn the screen on?
Very little movement.
And this is a separate issue from orientation changes?
That's correct.
But we're talking about, are we talking about movement activating the screen?
That's correct, yes.
Are we talking about the screen being sideways or up?
No, we're not talking about the orientation. We're talking about the actual raised awake function on the phone.
The camera usage, and in fact, no picture was taken that you're aware of.
Right, that's correct. I didn't see any photographs there for that time.
But is it your opinion? What is your opinion about whether someone deliberately activated that camera?
I mean, they could have. They could have been an accident. I don't know. I don't know what the person could have been doing, but it was a user interaction with the device.
And there was talk about phones falling to change orientation. Can a phone change orientation without actually falling?
No, I mean, there has to be some type of movement for the phone from portrait to landscape.
Right, but you don't have to drop the phone?
No.
So
if it's sitting upright, I mean, if it's sitting on its side, I can flip it this way and the orientation changes.
if somebody's running with the phone, can it change orientation?
Yes. Those are user events that can cause that.
Can we pull up what's been previously admitted as Defense Exhibit 45? This is, as I just said, previously admitted. Do you recognize this as GPS data in a cache database?
This looks like a cache for the ZRT cell location database. Yes.
And what's the timestamp for the first entry?
It's 6/9/21 at 2:51 and 21 seconds p.m.
In your opinion, would it be fair to say that if this phone had been extracted or put in a Faraday bag a couple of days earlier, we would have GPS data from 6/7?
And in my opinion, it's likely that we could.
We put up the step data exhibit.
Sorry?
The Apple step data exhibit. Okay, we previously talked about this, Alex Murdaugh's steps. between entries 27 and 28, you see those time periods? Just want
I
to
do.
remember that and go to the next page. Here we have Maggie's steps. Are there any steps, periods of steps that correspond between Maggie Murdaugh and Alex Murdaugh?
No, I don't see any.
So there's no period where both phones are stepping in the same period.
No.
Okay. And if we stay on this one, if we look at entries 5 and 6, the distance is almost identical, 31 meters.
Yes, it is.
Are the steps different?
The steps are different.
Is that a significant difference?
Not a significant difference for the 5 and 6. No.
So 59 versus 43. So is that 16? It took 16 more steps to go the same distance.
Yes.
So does that indicate shorter steps?
Shorter steps. Yes.
Okay, just the final question is to emphasize here. You can't tell us what a phone would do tossed out a window. That's not your expertise.
No, I can't.
But you can tell us how much motion it takes to turn on the screen.
Yes. Very little motion.
And you've
Turn the screen
demonstrated
on.
that.
Several times, yes.
And that feature of the iPhone was active on her phone,
Yes.
and it is totally separate from orientation behavior.
That's correct. It is.
No further questions.
Anything further?
Just a couple of things, Your Honor. You said you reviewed Paul's phone. Did you review the video that's been called the Kindle video in this case?
Yes, I have seen the video.
And did you have any information that would lead you to disagree that video was recorded at 8:44, about 55 seconds on the night of June 7th?
No, I don't have anything.
And the location data, would you agree the location data for that video was recorded at the kennels on the Murdaugh property at Moselle?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Barber was talking to you about steps data. And just so it's clear to the jury, and I'm going to speak in hypotheticals here for a second, but if you see the iPhone record steps over an interval of about 5 minutes, for example, it records a certain number of steps over that 5 minutes.
Okay.
Does that mean, is that phone trying to tell you that someone's uniformly walking at an exact pace that keeps them moving over that entire 5 minutes?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. They could stop at some point in the middle of that. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. And so they could stop and pick something up in the middle of a period showing steps, correct?
That's correct. It's just the steps between those two times.
All right. So you can't testify, you can't tell us if between, pull up the steps exhibit real quick. Next slide. All right. And looking at entry 28 on Alex's phone.
Entry what? I'm sorry. Couldn't hear you.
28.
28?
Yep.
Okay.
And between 902 and 906, we see, 283 steps, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And you can't tell us if his phone stopped at any point between those,
No.
what's
no,
that,
it's just
roughly 4 minutes or a little over 4 minutes.
no, just 283 steps between those two times.
So he could have walked 200 of those steps in the first 2 minutes and then only slowed down for the rest of the
Right.
2 minutes, correct? Or it could have been vice versa.
Yes.
Or he could have stopped for an entire minute somewhere in there. You can't tell us any different, correct?
It'd be unlikely to stop for an entire minute. I think if you stop for that long of a period of time, a new entry would be made. But
Do you know, is there a cutoff for iOS
no,
that would?
I think that just based off of what I'm seeing here, I mean, for instance, entry 29 and 30, you have about a 3-minute gap there, and
Okay.
yeah,
So maybe if he stopped for a minute, it would have started a new entry? is what
could
you're
have.
saying?
It
All right.
could
But if he
have.
had stopped for a shorter period of time, you wouldn't necessarily have, correct?
right.
Okay. All right. And finally, Mr. Barber has asked you about distance, and I think I want to make sure I understood you correctly. I think you testified that you would consider the actual steps count to be more accurate than the distance. Is that
I
correct?
would, yes.
Have you found any research or studies that has measured or the accuracy of steps or distance in iOS devices?
I have, yeah, and for instance, I've had cases where the step count and the GPS data is different sometimes.
Okay. And in your opinion, the steps count is probably more the most accurate?
In my opinion, yeah, the steps count is more accurate.
Okay.
You may step down. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today. We resume at 9:30 tomorrow. Please do not discuss the case. Anything further on this day?
Stay, Your Honor.
Nothing with the defense, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow.